Okay, I think we can get started in a few minutes. Okay, no, we need to operate that. We like just to try if we go forward and backward. Everything shape. Okay, so let's start to start today sharp on time. I'm super excited to chair this session to conclude this exciting day. We're going to have 4 sessions, very exciting programs, and we're going to start now with Manas Winnie. Sorry if I misspell it. Okay, great. She is an assistant professor at Alfred Lerner College at the University of Delaware, and her research focuses on several things, but put broadly on development and political economy, right? She holds a PhD in agriculture and resource economics from UC Berkeley, and today she's going to be talking to us about towns and rural inequality in India. Just as for you, but for all the following presenters, we're going to try to keep presentations between 15 and 20 minutes, so very likely 20, okay? And I'm just going to give you a sign when there is 5 minutes left, namely 15, and another one when 20 minutes are okay? So the floor is yours, and thanks so much.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for coming in for the last session of the day. And I know especially people who suffering live, I really appreciate you being here. So this paper is about showing you some spatial patterns in land inequality, which is basically distribution of land among different households, and how that spatial patterns kind of relate with urbanization. And why is this important? This is land confidence, right? So I don't have to motivate that land is important, but it is particularly so for a vast majority of living in rural and developing countries, because land is possibly the only important assets that many households have. And it could also have implications in terms of who migrates to urban opportunities. And what I'm going to also show you is this could be one of the lenses to look at why there's a preponderance of small and medium and marginal farmers in a lot of these sectors. So I'm going to be talking about 3 empirical patterns that pertain to the spatial distribution in rural land inequality and urban centers, distinct to urban centers. I'm not going to summarize, given that I only have 20 minutes. I'm going to go straight in and show you those patterns. But mainly looking at those patterns, using that these empirical patterns, we build a simple parsimonious model with what I think is minimal set of assumptions to kind of link this landholding distribution with the process of structural transformation and how the distributional consequences could have potential implications for moving people out of primary sector or agriculture sector to manufacturing to urban areas of high productivity. And so the key ingredients for this model is to really take the non-linearity in agriculture productivity seriously, like some of the early development economists have actually made a case for non-linearity in agriculture productivity, the U-shaped function Chris Barrett, Foster Rosenwald. And so we take that seriously and we take it to, that's the main ingredient of a model. And then we sort of look at the urban opportunity cost of remaining in agriculture sector. And then when this tension between remaining in agriculture and moving to urban center is summed over all the individuals within a village, that sort of generates the observed pattern in land remains. All right. So the second slide is directly jumping into where we situate our work. Basically, we build up, there's a large literature and important literature on land reforms and development, right? So, which have mainly looked at the downstream impact of land reforms. And there have been recent growing literature on long-run implications of these reforms, right? Redistribution, what happens after 40 years or 50 years after one-time redistribution. And these papers kind of start talking about while the immediate impact of land reforms like land redistribution and sealing may have immediate positive effect, but over the longer run, when the land gets subdivided among children and the next generation, it actually worsens inequality because there's this population pressure that you need to take into account. The second set of literature that we speak to is about looking at how spatial frictions have an implication for structural transformation. And a lot of these have looked at barriers to migration, skilling differences and selection into urban areas and so on. And we kind of highlight the importance of possibly staying in a rural land poverty trap that prevents these people who can actually exit agriculture and go to urban centers. And so and of course the ag literature on the UK production function is what, we don't contribute to that production function estimation, but we take that seriously and build our model. So I'll show you patterns using data from a flagship farmer income support program in India. The last 5 years has been a big shift towards direct transfers to farmers in India, and so there's been rich data collection and correction of landholding data at the farmer level, so that these transfers can be made at the end of each season to these farmers. So I have access to the universe of landholding data at each farmer level for one large state in India, and this is a one-time shot like in 2019. I supplement this with a bunch of other data sets, primarily the socioeconomic census, which is the census data of all households, which covers important asset information, including land. And then, link this with other population level, village level population and economic census data that gives you details about the amenities at the village level, distance to urban centers, and urban wages and so on. Using Shrug is a nice public good created by Paul Novosar and Sam Asher, so that helps us link all these different data sets. And then finally, we sort of check for some of the implications of the model with household panel data over 2 rounds to kind of look at what household levels can be observed dynamically over time. So before showing you the patterns, this is a math I could do to kind of make sure the identity of the state and the region is kind of remains anonymous. So here is just a raw spatial pattern. So what we did was, because we have land holding information at either household or at the farmer level, and we know where the farmer lives, which village do they belong, and these polygons in black are village revenue boundaries. So within a village, we know all the people and their landholding. So we create Gini index for each village. And I just plotted on them. And these gray areas are urban centers, right? So you see that some urban centers are larger, some are smaller, and then of course there's a megapolis sitting here, which I had to cut because, if you see the shape, you can guess what city it is. And so you can see this is the large urban area down here. And so what I want to show you is that when I first created this map and I was chatting with my co-authors, sort of the spatial pattern in inequality jumps at you. So you see that the spatial inequality gets worse close to towns, and then it gets better, or the inequality is lower as we move away from towns. Of course, with some noise. And so we were like, let's look at whether there's a distance gradient. And we do find a distance gradient. Here, this is just a regression of the Gini index and the village level. And I've created a distance bin, a 5 kilometer distance bin. We also can do it, cut it in different bin size, that doesn't really matter. And you see that the inequality is highest in peri-urban areas, within say 20, 25, 30 kilometers from the city center. And then over longer distances, it kind of reduces and then kind of stabilizes or even becomes better at far off, more remote or rural areas. The second pattern that I want to show you is this observed in Gini index that we see is driven by composition of farm sizes. So we see that we look at the ratio of mid-sized land holdings, and by mid-size, so in development economics, when we have a typical farmer in a sample, they usually have less than 2 acres or 1 hectare of land, right? Most of them. So the mid-sized farmer, so we take that definition seriously, and a lot of policy and government also define small and medium farmers and large farmers by these acreage bins. So under 5 acres are typically small and marginal farmers. And then what I define as mid-size some farmers between like 5 to 10 acres or 8 acres. And then large farmers are those that are about 8 to 10 acres and beyond, 20 acres, 40. But we don't see large mass on acreage beyond 40 acres because of the land ceiling and distribution acts that were done many decades earlier. So the observed pattern in the gradient of rural land inequality, urban gradient, is driven by fewer mid-sized farmers compared to both small farmers as well as large farmers. And then the third pattern that I want to show is the town size correlation. So not only is there any general urban gradient, but the gradient becomes steeper by the size of it. So as like I showed you, I mean, the cutoff of my 2x2 map was at this large metropolis, which I said if I showed you this, you could guess which cities you are, especially in India specialists. And so that kind of, you saw the scale of lighter colored tiles close to that larger town, and that's what this third pattern says, is that the larger the town is, the worse the inequality gets around those towns. Okay, so with these three patterns, we're like, okay, what could be going on, right? Because at the end of the day, what you do with your farm and whether you want to continue in your farm or move out to urban area is an individual choice problem. So we start with the farmer's problem, where the farmer can choose to either acquire more land or sell their land, downsize. And this depends on three things. One is the land size agriculture productivity relationship, which I said that what we take seriously is the U-shape, which means farmers with land holdings that are either small or very large are more productive than mid-size. And this is something that Foster Rosenberg also shows. And the reason being that if you're small, you will do more intensive agriculture, right? And then you have family labor. So you don't have span of influence problems. So your productivity and profits are going to be high. If you're a large farmer, you will do scale-based agriculture, mechanization. Your profitability is high. If you're a mid-sized farmer, you are in this difficult territory where you have to hire labor, and then you have to monitor them, so your profitability goes down. The second important factor in farmers' problem is their household size and their age, and their probability of bequeathing their land to the children. Right. So this is not an assumption. This mostly happens if you think about overlapping generation model, or if you think about what happens as you age out, you want to retire, what would you do with your land? Most of them pass it on to their children, and it leads to subdivision though. And so this choice of whether to acquire more land or to sell land, knowing that they're going to be subdividing the land in the future, will also affect their choice. And then finally, how much would they earn if they migrated from their urban job, net of migration costs? And so that third pattern that I told you about, larger the town, the worse the gradient, comes from the fact that larger towns, like being close to Washington D.C., is going to give you more opportunities, going to give you higher wages than if you're close to Williamsburg, Virginia, right? And so that's going to affect the farmer's problem. And then the model assumptions, I want to just kind of caveat that this is a partial equilibrium model that we look at. We're not allowing prices to change or urban wages to change, because we want to see what happens in equilibrium at the farmer level when the farmer has to decide based on the urban opportunity, and then when you integrate over all the farmers within that village. Right? So we take price of land and urban wages to be endogenous. So it's not going to be looking at sort of the whole general equilibrium implication of it. I'm going to just quickly skip this. This is the value function. This is exactly what I talked about. The farmer is going to maximize their value function, which takes into account the current period consumption and the future value from land if they're going to continue tilling the land. and then also takes into account the subdivision for among their inheritors. So this is what the value function from agriculture looks like. The nonlinear function is basically the agricultural value function. The flat lines are the returns from urban migration. Remember, that doesn't depend on the land holding, it only depends on the distance. And so this is looking at what happens within a particular village, looking at the land holding distribution across all different individuals within a village. So for all these individuals within a village, the distance to town is fixed, the urban opportunity is fixed, which is why the urban opportunity doesn't really get land holding size. Whereas the returns from agriculture is non-linear. And so you can see that this basically predicts that there is the small holders who are going to benefit from staying in agriculture and not moving. The large holders also would stay in agriculture and not move. But it's the mid-sized guys that would find it more profitable. And as you see that the greater the urban area, higher wages would move the opportunity cost, the urban returns higher up. Again, reducing transportation costs, putting like nice, rapid rail services and all would again, increase urban opportunity costs, and that would increase increase the probability of the mid-sized farmers. Okay, so then we do show empirical support for minimal assumptions that we say. Even though we rely on the literature, we also look for whether there is a U-shape in satellite data, and then we also see that the household size, number of children, family composition is independent of land holding size. All right, okay, and just briefly to kind of tell you why we shouldn't be worrying too much about the general equilibrium implications is that even these relative movement of farmers within a village, the land markets are relatively thin, right? So large majority of farmers, about more than 80% of landholders are small. Only 8% own 5 to 8 acres. And among them, a few of them be in the market to sell. So that's not going to dramatically affect the sale prices of them, right? It's relatively thin. And even survey evidence shows that most of the land that people have is acquired through inheritance rather than through open market transactions. This is just data simulated from the model, right? Pattern 1, which is distance gradient. It creates the exact same pattern that we saw empirically. The second one is a composition. The simulated data was, of course, we started off with like everyone with random endowment, with random land size, and so on, and let the model run over multiple iterations. And so it started producing, obviously it's not as clean as our empirical data, but you do see that all the patterns being sort of replicated with the empirical data. The second one is about showing that the observed inequality is actually being driven by fewer mid-sized farmers, both related to small farmers as well as large farmers. And finally, you also see the gradient getting worse with town size. So as the towns become large. So here I just want to show you what we try to do is, okay, because the model implies that the mid-sized farmers are more likely to leave leave agriculture and move to urban opportunity. Just want to show a couple of things. One is the first column is about using the household panel data to see whether the panel data can track the household by their size without any, differentially or not. Basically, we want to see evidence of differential attrition by their land size. So we do see that there is some differential attrition where large farmers and small farmers are less likely to be absent compared to like mid-sized farmers. Mid-sized farmers are less likely to be small farmers in the next wave, and they're more likely to become large. They will either acquire more land or leave. And then they also report higher income from agriculture sales. So you do see some evidence of them selling their land and moving away to urban areas where they make higher revenue. And then finally, we show that what is the implication? Who are these guys, the mid-sized farmers selling their land to? The model says that the potential buyers of this land would be other larger farmers who can benefit from the economies of scale. We do see that. So what we see here is there evidence of land consolidation. So we look at what is the ratio of the plot size at the 99th percentile of land size distribution to the 25th, and we see that ratio being higher. So the extreme, like the 1% land holding near towns are much larger compared to the 1% land holding much farther. We try to rule out a bunch of different explanations, the standard being skilling, family size, and in fact, like financial frictions is something that we don't even assume into our model. And our model works well if we include any of these factor market frictions, but we don't need these frictions at all. The key point being that mid-sized farmers, because of the non-linearity of production, they are sort of stuck in, they are stuck in this urban poverty trap in farther off rural areas. And there are these welfare implications that, like, because of greater consolidation, we do see a higher village level productivity in agriculture, higher mechanization. But of course, we are sort of stopping from making any welfare claims. And just to conclude, we want to say that I think it's important to look at land holding distributions overall, because that's one of the important classes of assets people hold. And then we say that the migration that we see is basically driven by these mid-sized farmers, of course, who form a very small sliver of the total population, who find it beneficial to migrate to urban areas only if they're closer to towns, where it makes sense for them to incur the cost of migration related to staying on in agriculture and earning revenue from their farm, and also paying higher wage income and so on. Factor market frictions, but then our model explains these patterns without these frictions. So if you add in these frictions, it's only going to make it worse. Finally, land inequality is evolving. It's really hard to ascertain when there is a steady state. Like I said, even if you do a land redistribution, the life cycle changes keep happening. And so to understand poverty traps and lack of structural transformation, it's important for us to see what's happening with the distribution of land in rural areas and how we can sort of think about structural transformation by seeing what is preventing people from migrating. That's all I have.
Thank you. Great. Thanks so much for the precision. Right on time. We have time for several questions. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very interesting paper, really nice data work and so on. My question is that when you're looking at land so near, urban centers, I mean, one of the possibilities that people are selling land because land needs to be developed, right, for the residences, expansion of the cities and so on. So I was just thinking, how that would affect the results that you had.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So there are two ways to think about it. One is, surely there's a greater need for land closer to cities, and there's greater value of land, then even the smallholders should be selling their land too. Like, if 2-3 smallholders combine, say, okay, great, there's great demand. So then you would see probably either really large consolidated farms and then nothing at all in the small and medium, in which case it should have an opposing effect on inequality, right? So you'll have like really efficient large farms, and then everything else is converted into urban use. We don't see that. It's basically we're seeing either large share of these under 1 acre lands, right? Now, what are these guys doing? So these guys are not being lifted out of poverty because of urbanization. The second is, even if you go farther away, like, I mean, even if you drop the under 5 kilometer bins, you do see that gradient outside the peri-urban influence. But there's certainly the real estate pressure, all of that. So
I mean, I would think also that the smallest, the poorest may not have the skill to go
Sure.
and get
Sure.
jobs. No?
Sure.
I think the gentleman just next to you had a question.
Yes. My name is Work. I want to ask you, the migration cost is the key to your paper.
Yes.
And how to calibrate or calculate the migration cost using the data? And is the simulation sensitive to different number of migration costs? Thank you.
So right now, we're just using the migration is just the migration cost is just a function of distance to town. And so we have that distance. So when we create the simulated data, like basically there 1,000 villages that are like at random distances from towns, and towns have like random population sizes. And so that distance is basically like the cost of migration is modeled in terms of distance.
Because in India or in China, if there are roads, the migration cost is relatively very small, I think.
The migration cost? Sure. So then it could be just a function of distance. I suppose if the distance, is like, suppose you use the migration cost as d square versus like, you can have like increasing or decreasing returns to scale. The scale parameter can be used to treat the, differential migration costs. Like suppose you put in a road or high-speed network, that's going to affect like how D is going to correlate with the migration costs.
There was a question there at the back, yeah.
Yeah, just maybe to clarify. So if I understood correctly, there is consolidation happening, so like landholders get larger with increasing returns. But you also talk about like how things land markets are.
Yes.
And if I understand correctly, like the point of society is that there are too many farms because there are like spatial frictions in markets and it's hard to consolidate like a big farm and stuff like that. So I just wanted to like understand the point on that regard of the paper. Is it that land markets are thing, but they do want to
Yeah. So land markets are a thing, but they do exist. It's not that they're non-existent. So it is, and it is likely that people are likely to buy a contiguous piece of land rather than like say, if, like I have a 10-acre land and this guy who's far away is going to sell his 5 acres. Now, going from 10 to 15 is going to be useful, but it's like I can't. But if it's next to me, then I will buy. So, I mean, it's an empirical pattern. Like, finally, we do see there's a consolidation result that's happening. But it's like 1%, the area of land at the 1 percentile, the top 1 percentile relative to the, quartile, like the land at the 20%.
So I guess like it's a cool result because alternative say like make a lot of way from this assumption that because of these spatial frictions, then you get this equilibrium where conciliation doesn't happen.
Okay.
And you're actually showing.
It happens only close to towns.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have the last time for the last question there, the lady in the back.
Oh, sorry.
Oli.
No, you go ahead.
Do you know the intra-district rural-urban migration, and does that change in areas that are more urban?
Intra-district, you're saying? Yeah. I mean, it could be like a lot of migration happens like maybe from a village to the nearest town, which is not a district headquarters. So we try to look at like non-parametric relationship between the distance to town, like looking at the bins, and then second we try to like control for a bunch of these unobserved time invariant factors like sub-district fixed effects and things like that. But even if there is differential migration, but the question is that it has to be correlated with the land holding and the distance to them.
Okay. We have time for one last question,
Okay,
Leah. I
okay.
think you also have a question.
That's right.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. I mean, it's on your own interest, right? Yes. Okay, so please.
Okay. Very quick question.
Now, in your paper, you're trying to measure the land size. Sorry, the farm size. Can you help me to verify what is the size measured? Is that land area or something differently? And my point here is that, I mean, for the land in particular, what the land being purchased used for production? Is that for rice? If that's the case, then there will be another issue related to, say, for paddy rice. My understanding, majority is mediums paddy rice. So one paddy rice, I mean, the particular size of the operation, it will encounter a particular issue because in China, rice production very couldn't be from irrigations.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's.
Okay. So here my left-hand side variable that I'm measuring is the inequality Gini index size. It's the index within the village. So yes, using the size like draw. So suppose me, you, and Bruno, we are in the same village. I have 2 acres, you have 10 acres, and Bruno has 15 acres. Then I'm just creating a Gini index based on, like if it was equal, then all of us, let's say, we just pool our land and divide by 3. That would be ideal, right? Like 0, yeah, exactly. And so because we deviate from that uniform distribution, that is the Gini index. So whether, it doesn't really matter how we measure as long as there is no measurement error that's correlated with our actual size. And I mean, we try to kind of look at the pattern using 3 different sources of data. So we look at the land holding, the land records data from the government, which is based on revenue. So whatever the government is doing to make sure it's accurate. The second is we look at survey data, which is perception. And so we try and triangulate and we find very similar patterns, no matter what type of data. In fact, like my co-author said, he spoke with another colleague of his who's doing related work in Indonesia and different contexts, they find similar patterns. So there is, I mean, I would love if I had like globally representative microdata to see if this kind of replicates.
Very good. Thanks so much. Very good question. So now we have, okay. You were supposed to be in the program, not the presenter. No, that's fine. Just to know. Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry, but just to keep.
I think it's a very good thing.
It's the last and it's the last session.
I really want to do that job.
Okay. I'm doing that for you.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jordan from Peking University, and today it's my honor to share you with the work about with Professor Sheng from GNU and Professor Yu from HKPU. We are talking about the financial development and rural transformation evidence from county level data in China. So I noticed that the other 3 presenters will tell you some truth about India. So before that, I will give you some details about China's agriculture and financial markets. So let's look at the first about, we all know that China has achieved the miracle in agricultural development over the past 40 years during 1978 to 2022. So according to the data inside, agriculture GDP has grown at 5.4 annual per rate, 4 times more than the population growth rate. And the rapid agricultural development have led to the poverty reduction and economic structure change. So here is a graph that shows you an example of how fast China's agriculture has gotten. The side shows you the green yield in China. So grew from the 3 million pounds to 6 million pounds, more than like 2 doubles from 1978 to 2020. And the right-hand side to show you the rural income in China. And also it can be seen it grew from 1978 to 18 times to the 2020. So it is known that institutional reforms on the land, labor, and financial markets are also very essential to driving the agricultural development. Several researchers have discovered about HR's reform and also focal reform, which is conducted by Lin and Fu in previous years. And also, recent literature has discussed about establishing the rural financial markets is also important for the agricultural development. However, little is known about the mechanism and also the real impacts. So in this paper, we are going to do several things. The first one is that we would like to examine the impact of the rural financial markets on the ALP with two particular aims. The first one is that we would like to examine the mechanism behind it, particularly in the technology progress and also the capital accumulation. Apart from that, we also would like to see how the distinguish the different roles of the components of the capital accumulation. We decompose it to the land consolidation and also the capital deepening. To do so, we use a national experiment, namely the post-Savings Bank of China for PSBC reform, which I will talk to you later in the empirical part, to conduct the analysis. To correctly measure this reform, we use two measurements. One is the continuous variable of the open branches across different counties. Another is the dummy variable to see whether the branches start to provide the loan business. And here we use the generalized stability ID to identify the causality. In terms of the data part, we construct the agricultural production for nearly more than 1,400 rural counties from 1993 to 2016. So we think our paper can contribute to the literature in at least 3 points. The first one is that we following a simple solo model to see the mechanism and also the impacts through the agricultural productivity and the capital accumulation, these two mechanisms. And the second one is that we measure the financial market reforms by combining two different types of reforms and also mentioned before. Thirdly, we would like to highlight the role of the land consolidation. So we split between the capital deepening and the land consolidation. What's more, we would like to see the heterogeneity effects based on the regression forest approach. So apart from this, we think our paper will contribute more to the developing countries, since China is one of the most largest developing countries in the world. So the financial reforms or the rural transformation in China will also give some suggestions to other countries in the future. Before we go to the part of the empirical parts of data, well, I would like to go some thinking about the background in the agricultural output and input. So in our descriptive statistics come from the agricultural production count we construct in this paper. You can see from the left-hand side shows you the agricultural labor productivity growth and level. The black line shows the level, while the dashed line shows the growth rate. And you can see from this period, which is that China has undergone the rural transformation. They will also experience a high growth rate of the ALP growth. And behind this, on the right side, you can also see on the same pattern behind the capital labor growth and the land labor growth, which give us hints that these two components are also the drivers of the agricultural labor productivity. The next part is about why we choose the PSBC reform as our representative rural financial development. So along with the growth rate of the ALP, the financial reforms also undergone several changes. So during this period, we keep the PSBC reform as a representative, and we can see that before 1993, there's no data around the 600 counties have already signed the PSBC branches, and later on, but in this period, the branch can only provide the service that, like, you can only withdraw the currency from bank. They don't provide any loan business. So after that, in 2007, there was a reform in the PSBC, which is conducted at the headquarters. It means that you can, in each branch, you can provide the small loans. And the first branch is only started in 5 provinces, and later on, the loan service is started nationwide. So we choose these reforms because we think that the reform of the rural financial markets, same as the PSBC reform, starts late 1990s, which is later than the land and the labor reform. And also the reform is at transforming the system to a more market-based system. This is the graph shows you the counties that own the PSBC branch in the left side. So it gives you the same pattern that there will be the market penetration of the financial reform. And on the right side, you can see when the county starts to provide the loan service since 2007. We use these 2 variables to construct a continuous variable to measure the financial development later. There are several literatures to discuss about the financial reform and agricultural development. So internationally, there are vast literature has already discussed whether the finance can create productivity. But most of them have focused on the non-agriculture sector or the manufacturer sector, and they focus on the charity or the firm's own profits. In China, there are also several scholars have discussed about the financial markets in rural China. And recently, some literature start to see whether the financial reforms can affect the local economy. And then comes to our model part. So as I mentioned before, we borrow the single solo model as shown here. Take a Cobb-Douglas function, and everybody is very familiar with this. YAPZL represents the agricultural production, technology progress, capital, land, and labor. And take the first order condition and also the linear form, and we can get this one, where the agricultural labor productivity can be decomposed into 3 components: technology progress, physical capital accumulation, and land consolidation. We would like to check whether how the financial market reforms can affect the ALP through these 3 mechanisms. And let R represent shocks talk about the PSBC reform. We take the 1 represents after the PSBC reform, where the 0 takes for the before the PSBC reform. We can get some weightage of the ALP like this. So following the theoretical model, we can get a baseline empirical model, which is shown here. In this model, we care about several things. Like YTZ can be represented here, and R is the continuous variable combine 2 variables. First one is the continuous variable, measure the number of years since the first PSBC branch was established, and the dummy variable, whether the PSBC branch is belong to providing loan services. Because we think that when we compare these 2 variables, the longer for the branch is cited in this period, it has more power or the more influence on the market's financial penetration. And the 3 coefficients we are really interested here is alpha, beta, gamma represents how the financial markets can affect the technology progress, capital accumulation, and the land consolidation. However, before we do the empirical analysis, here are still like some identification problems. The first one is that although I mentioned before the reform started at the headquarters of the PSBC, but it still faces that PSBC reform might not be randomly assigned across counties. So we use the PSM matching method to include the variables such as the industrial GDP, physical expenditure, and physical income, because we think these covariants are really high correlated with the financial reform market, but not really correlating with the ALT. And also do the Calvin trend test in the full sample and the reaction samples. Secondly, there will be some omitted variables for the potential reverse causality. Although we try to control several covariances in the model, there are still some omitted variables. So we so instead of just use the heavy approach, because in our model at least 3 variables facing the endogenous problems, but it's very hard for us to find the really appropriate instrumental variables. We take the general matter moment estimation technique, and also the endogenous test that have been conducted, and I will later show you in the basic model, basic results. Other economic ratios may like the negative wage problem, and we use the Gardner's method to solve this problem. Also, several heterogeneity effects because of the cumulative impact or the cross-left summation. We use the inventory study to do so. And also the high correlation between the capital labor and non-labor, we do the robustness checks. And then about the data source, I would like to leave several minutes to see our data, About the agricultural production count data, we use this number rural counties in China for this period. Rural counties in our data means that historically, these counties have more than 90% population, that's 90% agricultural population with 2/3 arable lands in China. And the agricultural input and output definition follow the art of the science that in this field, and we follow the USDA to define it like this. The agricultural value added output is the total output minus the total cost in intermediate inputs, and we define it by the agricultural producer price index. And also the capital inputs, we refer to capital services by using the PMI method and include these 3 components. For the line input, we refer to the line service that also be adjusted by the real term. And we adopt a hedonic approach to do this. For the labor inputs, we refer to the hours worked, and we adjust it by using the quality adjustment. And we need to take a more look at the PSBC reform. And I have mentioned it several times before. We use the 2 variables and multiply them together to get a measurement of the PSBC reform. So one measure the market penetration and other measure the market deregulation. Here give you the structure. Here is a geographic map of the ALP and PSBC branch distribution. And so the darker the blue color means the higher ALP or the higher PSBC distribution in these areas. And take the first 2 as example. And you can see from in 1993, there are only a lot of counties are in a very low ALP level. However, in 2016, you can see this number grow very rapidly. And we can see the same patterns in the PSBC distribution. And then come the empirical results, mainly in these 4 parts about the several tests before we do the precise empirical results. And also we do the impact, we analyze the impacts, also the marginal impact analysis. So here is a graph shows you the relationship between the capital labor ratio, land labor ratio with the agricultural labor productivity. And here gives our two hints. The first one that we can see from it follows the solo model with the higher capital accumulation, the higher agricultural labor productivity. However, different with the capital labor ratio, we can see after the PSBC reform, the land consolidation can see a more flattened pattern in here. And we also do the Calvin trend due to the time limited. And you can see one sentence you can see that after matching, it can pass the parallel transit. For the negative weights test, we can see that among this amount, every treatment that's 43% receive the negative weights, meaning that we have to be careful to estimate impacts. So we use the Gardner method to judge. And then for the impacts, the business results are shown here, and I'm going to talk this in 3 sentences. The first one is that looking at capital liberation and lot liberation, when we add them together, it takes up nearly 40% of the contribution to the ALP. Based on the constant return skill, that means the labor can contribute nearly 60% of the ALP. That is more consistent with China's real situation, because China is a agricultural production is a labor intensive model. And the second one is that you can see the PSBC reform can increasing the agricultural labor productivity at around this level. But this is in the 1993 to 2016 among 23 years. So in each year, the growth rate will be less than 1%. Also, when we see the interaction term, we can see financial market PSBC reform can increase the return to capital significantly. Well, you can see asymmetric impacts on the line consolidation. It can decrease the returns to line consolidation. And so the Gardner's after we adjusted the negative weights problem, you can see here, that means the direct impact cannot be very significant, or the mechanism behind the capital labor ratio will be still positive and the land labor ratio will still be negative. That is strong. And after we see the inventory analysis, it gives a similar pattern with the previous analysis. And last, I would like to talk a little about the mechanism behind them. We use the generalized random forest to see the compares of the physical capital labor ratio and land labor ratio. And following this method and the previous interpretations in Harding in 2019 to analyze the heterogeneous impact on the program, we can see that for the capital labor ratio here, with the higher capital labor ratio, the effects can be possibly more strongly like this. However, for the land labor ratio, starts with a high level. However, when the consolidation, when lines become more consolidated, the effects can be negative and it jumps really fast. Then we do several robustness checks using the other measurements and solve the correlation problem, and also restrict the sample to subsamples. And here is the result. So in summary, we can see that the first columns shows comparison, means that only after the long visits we can see more positive impact on the capital labor ratio and more negative impact on the land labor ratio. And for the 5 and 6 columns, we after solve the multi-collinearity problem, the results are still robust. And last, for the poverty, has county and Bank County, it have the similar interpretations we expected before. So that's the conclusion I will briefly go through. Our study shows that the PSBC reform has generated a positive direct impact on ALP through improving the technology programs. 1% will like to generate around this amount in productivity along with this amount in capital accumulation. And so there will be asymmetric impacts between the capital deepening and the land consolidation. These findings underscore the positive role of financial institutions, and it will foster agricultural labor productivity through the promotion of the local investment, which will give more hints to other countries. That's all. Thanks for your listening.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any questions? Yes, please.
Very good work. So China's farmers are primarily smallholders, and the proportion of China's farmers who borrow money from bank is very low, about 10%. So through what channels is law related liquidities who benefits from this policy in regular?
Okay, so I will just have answered the question. You mean that from the macro aspect, that so our paper, the noise is just focused on the macro level, and we try to figure out the mechanisms just like we mentioned before, the land consolidation in a macro way by using, you say, the household survey or other to see the mechanism. With this, we think we can provide a more precise explanation. And for your like 10% of the population that own loan or just give these loans, I think it is possible. And so our just to give the more hints or just to give some suggestions for the real terms. If we can get some more data on these parts, we can get a more precise estimation.
Very good job.
There's
Yes, hi. Sorry if I'm talking too much, but
no, don't worry. Fine, though.
okay. So I was just wondering that, what is the source of this labor productivity increase in agriculture when the loan is coming? Is it because that, when these banks are giving loans, people are starting non-agricultural business and basically drawing labor out of agriculture, and that would actually lead to increase in agricultural labor productivity? That's one channel that you can think of. The other channel, of course, is probably what is implied in your analysis, is that farmers themselves are taking more loan and so on. So is it possible for you to distinguish between these two sources?
Probably I think that too.
Sure.
So, actually, for the current phenomenon that we observe, a more possible explanation of this phenomenon is more coming to related to how this financial, services provided or asymmetric impact on these different types of crops. So as you may notice that in agriculture, we have both small and large one. And usually for the larger one, they are more likely to make more investment and having more capacity to cope with this type of external shocks. Well, the smaller one actually is more likely to be vulnerable. Without financial type of services, in many cases, small one will gradually be absorbed by the large one through the market consolidation. But once financial market, being relaxed or deregulated, all this type of banking loans goes to the sector. Even everybody has the same opportunity to get access to borrow money. It has greater advantage for the relatively small one to get, these support. So it easily helps them to over this difficult times of this. But on the other hand, actually, this helps to reduce the weight that for a lot of farms to merge and associate. So in this exercise, as well as some other exercises conducted, we notice that financial market deregulation concerns the agriculture itself will generate differently from the manufacturing industry. Right? Instead of facilitate capital accumulation generally in the manufacturing industry itself, the farm sector actually could generate some of negative capital impact, which is particularly related to the land usage in this, because the land is a particular type of inputs, which is very precious and it has to be relied on by this farm. So we have some other additional elements to point out this direction rather than to explain it by using like a simple
Any other questions? I actually have, we have time. I have one question that is somehow related. One of the sort of assumption, conceptual that your study based upon is this and the production function, right? It's of Douglas production function, right? So all of the sort of productivity is a sort of residual, assuming the sort of fixed input shares, right? But thinking about essentially a long time period over which the economy changed a lot, factor shares in the production could have changed in China. If we think about structural change within agriculture, switching the main crop of production, have different labor intensity and labor intensity. Is this something you account for, or can this somehow attenuate the results you find? Do you have any sense of that?
Well, I can jump in.
Sure.
The exercise here is using like 24 years long data. Definitely, you're quite right, which is over time, this structural overproduction is shifting over time. But because we construct a very accurate type of production account, which is at the very beginning when you present the result, it gives about marginal returns capital relative to the labor. In China's case, about 4/6. Now, comparing to solo as well as, historical type of in the United States opposite. Right? So developing countries like OECD countries, more like capital intensive type of production system in there. In developing countries like China, Africa, it's more like, labor intensive.
But this I get. What my question is more about how these have changed over time, right?
I'm going to touch that point. Even there's quickly changing that direction, but the pattern has to change. That's my point. I want to tell on average over this whole period of time.
I see.
And second evidence for that part of things shown later. Financial reform actually happened very late. Comparing to the rest of market reform. As you can see, the real starting point for the financial reform is starting from late 1990s. And the whole reform period covered 2000 to 2010 along the time. And capital accumulation in China actually happened quickly after 2010, in particular in recent 10 years. And the capital actually mainly sourced from customer service. We have several papers talking about things. So according to those type of accumulated evidences, you see that it's still at the very beginning to some extent to accumulate it, rather than over 10 years.
Yes, we have time for one final quick question.
Thanks. From this year. I'm going to step away from the results and actually ask the logical question. What for the use of darkness for your work? But this entire cloud of the heterogeneous thinking and access estimators has been growing like a muscle basically for the last 3 years and alternatives. And all of them identify causal effects for the binary treatment. So it's not continuous values which we're doing. So I'm just curious to learn what's the identification have you found on the continuous value implementation. And overall, why do you use Gartner as the imputation estimator instead of always and down? I don't know, this around now or something else, right? It's like how many are worth it? So
I'm going to answer your question in this related because we've done quite a lot of other alternative exercises, but we haven't got a chance to present the results here. Number one, okay, so in the literature, majority of the exercise, which is focusing on analyzing this financial shock and at the same time trying to use it value. Okay, take example in the United States case, banking deregulation usually using 0.1 in the way to capture. But these type of things being highly in question because there's lack of variation. It could be overlapping with other type of reforms in trade. So in our exercise, we're trying to consider two-dimensional type of thing. One is about penetration, which is the open process over time. The other is more about fundamentally changing the way of operation of the bank, starting from with no bank loans to legal bank loans, in particular to the small bank. So this one helps us to create a generalized difference in different type of the shocks, which is more reliable. Okay, second point I want to say that identification is really a big issue. Okay, in particular, like this type of type of shock. In our case, we choose to use GMF rather than using like general IB type of things. Is because in the whole system, it's something like structural model estimation. You are going to cope with like on the screen, not necessarily across the actor without fire. So to identify the probability in such a system by taking up randomly something that is generatable on the problem in the case. Okay, so in here is quite hopeful. But in addition, the first type of sensitivity analysis trying to actually split between two types of jobs to analyze how each of them are generating. Now, in the first four columns in the first robust check, you can see that penetration, banking penetration or opening new branches in the new context didn't actually generate much of the impact as you've seen. What actually played a more important role is changing the business from only saving deposits to giving or providing banking loans to the farmers actually played a role. So that speed gave us the case in terms of that. So this is my second point about identification. The third thing is.
I'm sorry. Can we move to the third point eventually
Yeah,
in the break, just because we need to move on with subsequent speakers. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
No. Okay, is it everything set? Okay, so now we have Claudia. Thanks so much for being here and presenting. Claudia is a development economist who generally, right? She's worked on several institutions, mostly here at the World Bank, right? And she does research on transportation policies and rural poverty, put broadly. And she has a PhD in economics just here on the corner, right, from George Washington, University. And today she's going to be talking about market integration and rural land inequality to us. Thanks so much, Claudia. The floor is yours.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the organizers, including Thea. Hi, thank you. And it's exciting to be here presenting our paper here at the bank. This is joint work with Farhad Shofi, Brian Blankenspor, and Shani Enron. And what we do is we look at whether market integration increases rural land inequality, looking at India. So to start off, have you ever wondered why here in the US, for example, the land farms tend to be these strong agribusinesses? And you travel elsewhere, like to India, and you're more likely to find smaller family farms. And thinking back, the US also used to have quite a few small family farms. How did this evolution take place? So comparing the US and India, well, the US has very high market integration, lots of highways, transport infrastructure, and India has been a leader in transport investment as well. So the question was like, did this falling transport costs relate to land inequality? So globally, land inequality had been on a downward trajectory until about the 1980s, and at which point land inequality started to increase. And did this increase did coincide with quite a few market integrations. So did one have a role to play in the other? And that's what we look at here. So theoretically, so there's a theory from Braverman and Stiglitz that suggests that lower trade costs, say from improvement in transport infrastructure, can increase land inequality when in villages when credit markets are imperfect, let's say. So lower trade costs make land more profitable, increase the profitability of investing in agricultural technology, And so larger farmers, they are better able to access credit and invest in these increasing returns to scale technologies. So they might buy up land from their more credit constrained, smaller neighbors. So this would end up increasing land inequality. So there's the theory. So that next, what does data tell us? So here, we calculate, similar to your paper land genie, at the district level, using data from the IHBS, India Youth Development Survey, the second round from 2012. And we relate that to a market access index, which is calculated in a gravity fashion using travel times between districts and population amounts. So, thing here is that estimating this regression by OLS would of course be biased. So we do control for quite a few in X the factors that might influence replacement and population centers, various geographic variables, but it's impossible to control for everything you possibly think of that might influence this too. So we're left with endogeneity. So one of the methods that we embark on to address this endogeneity is to look towards the golden quadrilateral, which is a series of highways in India. And so India, as I mentioned, is a leader in transportation investment. And during the colonial era, the British also invested heavily in transportation. So the Golden Quadrilateral dates back, the roads that make it up, some of them date back centuries, and they today they're a highway network connecting Delhi, Patna, Chennai, Mumbai, with a slight kink to reach Bangalore. So this is the highway network. And what's cool about this, A, it's a great highway network, and B, it's parts of it have been around for centuries. So the Grand Trunk Road, for example, which runs along here, that dates back centuries. So the historical roads, which are the red lines, which date back to like 1872, for example, overlap pretty well with some of the gray. The point being that we're not focused so much on the recent upgrading of the Golden Quadrilateral, but rather exploiting the fact that it's been there a while. So we're looking, our focus is on the long-term cumulative effects of transport infrastructure. So how does this help us with endogeneity? So the idea is that by looking at the Golden Quadrilateral, it's kind of an inconsequential place design, in the sense that Kolkata and Delhi, they were targeted by the their big cities, so the roads were built largely to link these two points and beyond. Patna is quite close to it, so its market access is quite high, but it was not targeted. Comparing Patna to Darjeeling, this difference in market access is what helps us achieve identification. So from Putnam's perspective, the market access is quasi-random. So the specific instrumental variable that we rely on is we create a hypothetical linear network between these target cities, similar to Faber's paper. And we take the distance from the district to the nearest branch of the GQ and use that to instrument for market access. So when we do that, we find that there is a strong positive relationship between the land Gini and market access, with a strong first stage of approximately a 10% increase in market access index, increases the land Gini by 2.3% and landlessness by 4%, which is consistent with the earlier theory I mentioned about Fraser and Stiglitz, that the 10% increase in market access increases agricultural technology adoption by about 2.9%. So these, I'm not going to go through all the robustness checks, but these results have been robust to various alternative instrumental variables, estimators, or market access. So this is work in progress. So one of the things that we've been working on is to expand our data set. So we're relying mostly on the IHVS, and then market access was calculated using travel time estimates from Allen and Atkin. So what we did was to build upon the Allen and Atkin methodology, taking the 1996 scanned road map of India and assigning travel speeds to the various pixels based on the colors of the map. So by doing this, we were able to estimate bilateral travel speeds, similar to how Allen and Atkin had done it, but we could do it for all of mainland India. So using this, we recalculated the market access, which now allowed us to use more of the IHDS survey. And when we use this alternative measure, updated measure of market access, the results they hold. So we were able to increase our sample size in the land Gini direction from 200 to 335, and we find again a positive relationship between land Gini and market access. And these are the ones using the fully quadrilateral instrumental variable. And then, so just, I think I went through that quickly. So basically, just to tie the pieces together, what we did was we were looking at market integration and whether it leads to land consolidation. This idea of farmers buying up their neighbors' land maybe. So we do find evidence that these huge investments in roads and highways are likely to increase land inequality. But it's worth keeping in mind that a big push to integrate the rural hinterlands would help increasing returns to technology adoption, and thereby agricultural growth as well. So, anyway, that's what I got.
Okay.
Thank
Okay,
you.
thanks a lot. Very good. Thanks so much. We can eventually compensate some of the slight delays from the previous. But before that, any questions, any remarks?
Just very quickly, how is the standard errors calculated for the table you showed us?
So the robust heteroscedasticity and
The reason I ask is because your instrument is very spatial in nature. You could imagine that market access is very correlated in a lot of nearby districts.
Yeah.
So something like Conley or maybe clustering at a higher level could be.
we did do a common bound possibly intelligence requests check as well. Yes.
Two quick questions. Number one is that, like the first question leads to the first presenter, how do you measure this land consolidation? Is that purposeful? If it's something for agricultural production itself, actually, the land consolidation should be measured by enterprise rather than just per capture land uses. So my point is that you tell me how to measure land consolidation. And my second point,
Sure.
Andrew Foster's recent paper out in JCE is talking about that in developing countries, majority of the agriculture sector, small farms overpopulated, simply because of the capacity of land machinery. So that making the land consolidation is hard to, make. So my point was that in terms of interpreting the result, which is marketing access, helps this type of land consolidation or to make the farm size to be relatively larger, with the political place.
So to the first question about the land genes, so it's using the IGA as land ownership variable and then calculate a land gene similar to what.
That's just my point, which is because land use, for example, if I'm a horticulture farm, we really need a big piece of land. 3 hectares is already enough. Mushroom and 1 hectare.
If you're a specialized horticulture farmer, we also look at like landlessness as an alternative measure of land inequality, and it also increases with market access. Farhad, would you like to jump in?
I don't think I understood the question very well. So, but what I can tell you is that the inequality measures are at the district level. And of course, district to district, it could vary. The crop composition can vary, so the farm size can vary, certainly. But you also have to remember that it's India, so it's mostly very small farmers, and most of them producing some kind of cereal crops. So you don't really need a huge, it's not deep plantation that we are talking about. We're talking about, more generally cereal and some of the pulse cultivation that's happening. So I don't think that it applies in that way. So that was your first question. What was, sorry?
Right. Well, let me just follow up with the first one. So I wonder whether you could use zero problem for the measure, if that's possible. Then that
I mean, it's gonna reduce the number of observation, but yes, well taken. But
yeah, my second point is all about how to interpret this market access making large farm size, right? Because land gene is trying to say that wheel of production is changing, like the first example.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So my point was that first the farm size first, farm productivity decline first is the size goes out, and then after a certain threshold, we're going to benefit the industry. Right? But here is the linear relationship with this logic helping to become zero. That
So yes, so in general, I think there are two answers to that. Okay, first of all, this one is average, right? It's not necessarily looking at the whole distribution of the farm size distribution changing. Basically, it's all the distribution is actually summarized by the Gini coefficient, right? So that's number one. Number two was your question is that in the earlier presentation, what we have seen was that it's the medium-sized farmers who are selling off, and and basically you are having a lot of large farmers and small farmers, and that's leading to increase in inequality. Of course, that applies here too. Of course, you can say that some people are selling and some farms are getting consolidated, and this is why you are seeing this relationship. The reason it happens is that when you have better access to market, suddenly agriculture becomes a lot more profitable, right? To invest in technology and to consolidate and all this, and that's what is leading to this, partly leading to this increase in inequality. And this is, in a way, the first paper, that presentation, and what we are finding are very similar.
Okay. There was a question there. Is there a question? Yes.
Yeah, sure. So, Barbara Meyer, UC Santa Barbara. I'm curious, like taking a step back and thinking about the policy implications and what this tells us in a more, normative world. Like, what is the implication of this increase in inequality as a result of market access? And in some ways, you would actually imagine that maybe that market access, yes, it increases land inequality, but by improving agricultural productivity, the fact that people are transacting and selling their land, the youth getting hopefully returns from that greater productivity, even if they're the ones selling off, might be reducing overall wealth or income inequality in the country. And so I'm just trying to grapple with the implications of land inequality as the outcomes in both of these studies and what that tells us in terms of policy relevant outcomes.
Maybe can I throw my questions in just so sure, of course. Related. So one of the things that I thought about with yours and yours is that there's this sort of stylized fact that Foster Rosenzweig showed in their 2004 EDCC and a working paper by Jacob Astana, that it seems like in the places that agricultural productivity became very high over the Green Revolution period, that the non-agricultural productivity actually was low, like it stayed low. Like there's an inverse relationship between the takeoff of the ag and the non-ag sector. And so to some extent, I'm wondering about sort of how this fits in with that, and in particular, I think I had some more nuanced thoughts on that, but sort of how that fits into your model, like how that relates to policy implications, and then additionally, when it comes to this medium-sized farmers disappearing concept and the landlessness, I'm wondering, and this idea like is it a good thing or it's a bad thing? Like one of the things that I'll point out in my very related paper is that you can see as the Green Revolution technology is rolling out, there's less medium-sized farmers, but there's also less landless farmers, and it's not the same thing because the less landless farmers is coming from landless laborers acquiring land. And so I don't know if it's necessarily like if you see less people who are landless, doesn't mean that it's less of the medium-sized farmers. It could be the medium-sized farmers are doing one thing, and the landless people are also acquiring land, and those have really different policy implications for welfare. So I think sorting those two things out makes a big difference in policy implications.
Yeah. So, as you note, like we were looking at land inequality, so looking at like consumption inequality and income inequality and so forth, that's beyond the scope of this paper. So I'm going to kind of sidestep that.
But I think this is I guess it's a valid point, especially because everyone has a sort of own perspective. If you come from, I don't know, a macro misallocation literature.
Mhm.
Restuccia will say, okay, like what is the ideal thing if you address misallocation? All of the land should be with the most productive farmers. This will be inequality zero, very extreme, right? But inequality zero could be also all of the land with the least productive farmers. So I guess your question is precise along that how to map this inequality into other sort of measures that give more tangible conclusions in the reality, I guess, right?
One thing which I think kind of like green over whatever, not put specific attention to the welfare implication, right? Because I mean, it's not causal. I mean, we're showing like patterns, and we show increasing like inequality goes down, and it's also like we see high correlation between Gini and like welfare measures. So we look at agricultural productivity, like FAO, guys, yield measure or mechanization, and if you were to apply the guys, now you do see higher productivity effect. Now I have another project where I'm looking at how does this relate to non-ag sector. And so there could be like some, I mean, one way to think about it is this substitutability, like it's like higher land inequality going to worsen. But in fact, like whatever we've seen so far is actually complementary, where like these higher, like large land guys are actually using the returns from agriculture because of lack of because of financial friction, they're not invest in like proprietorships in businesses and do. So you do see emergence of small enterprises in areas with inequality. Of course, it's separate. It's really hard to make normative claims.
Can I jump in?
Yes.
Sorry, actually, I can say something about this. So I know that, most people think that, high inequality means somehow lower welfare, right? I don't think that is the right conclusion to take from here. For two reasons. One is that we do see productivity effect. So that's one reason. The second reason is that for India, there are also papers which shows that there are too many little farms in there. And if you do consolidate, that would actually increase, even if without the technological change, investment in ag productivity, you would still see a boost in agriculture productivity. And this is and because India is a country where most people are still linked with agriculture, you would expect that this would reduce poverty, would have better welfare implication. And this is why I think, maybe Claudia was not very forceful about talking about it, but very fast last line there actually says that this is going to lead to agricultural growth, right? So my prior in this case would be that this might actually lead to better outcomes. But since we have not really established that channel that clearly, we're not claiming anything.
Okay, I think this is a great takeaway, and so thanks so much. And now we can move to give Leah the honors to conclude this day. So while we set up things, just give a short intro on Leah. Leah is associate professor at the Department of Agriculture, Environment, and Development Economics at the Ohio State University, and also associate editor at the American Journal of Agricultural Economics. And she does very broadly, Leah, research on chronic poverty, relationship between chronic poverty in low income and agricultural settings, and also relationship between health and poverty. She has a PhD at the Culinary University, and as we might have guessed from some of her comments earlier today, she's going to be talking about the Green Revolution and rural inequality in India. Yeah, thanks.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. I thought, World Bank land economics, surely there's going to be people who will have really relevant thoughts. And then it's so rare that you have three papers that are so tightly related. Like, I think the last time I was in a session like this is 5 years ago. And it's so nice when you have that, because it feels like you can really learn a lot from other people. And so, yeah. I really enjoyed these two papers. They were obviously highly related, and this one I think is again quite related, but taking a more sort of historical lens, sort of how did we get to the place that we are now? I'll say this paper is like really a work in progress. And you'll see that I sort of, the part where I labeled calmly a problem, I will like lay out to you this thing that I'm sort of grappling with now, and you'll see sort of, I have a little bit of a pause that I haven't even been working on this recently because I've been thinking like, how do I even grapple with this problem? So your thoughts will be very welcome on that.
You just use up and down.
So try to hide both of the bars.
Yeah.
Present it like
Yeah,
this,
yeah.
I guess, right? And hide
Yes.
also the other bar.
Uh-oh. That this doesn't actually save. You still have it on the flashlight because. No, but let's like open it from the flashlight. Maybe it's to keep. Yeah. It looks like maybe it's done.
But eventually try to save us. Try to save it as this, and that's open from the disk rather than opening from the drive. Yeah, just save it locally, in the desktop or something.
Good.
You cannot.
No, I'm saying we could do that. I wonder even if it just didn't come on such a thing properly. Elsa, send it to you. Can you check it on your?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Open it because I just wonder if maybe this when I use this software, it actually pulls up with something to just having problems with it. So I wonder if it's it just actually. Oh, yeah. Like it was time thing. Like I think I had to open it with the tailgate. Not like oh, it's fine. Like sure.
Okay, no, I don't know. I don't know. No, but I guess that's what I wanted.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah.
Good job.
Okay, let's just keep it.
Okay.
And then you remind me that I need to remind my.
But yeah, I know my work one, but I don't think I know my email. But I think it has my sister's name and what else it has. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the Green Revolution. And I bet everybody here doesn't need a lot of background on this, but the Green Revolution, there's been a lot of papers recently on the global rollout of green revolution technologies, in part because this data set came out that sort of tracked the global rollout of high-yielding varieties. So everybody wrote papers about it. And the papers showed that there were higher yields, land agricultural intensification alongside land expansion, lower grain prices, decreased mortality and fertility rates, increased life expectancy, smaller populations, increased GDP per capita, increased non-ag labor productivity after a lag. All of these sound, like it's a really good thing. So for sure, the Green Revolution did a lot of really great things globally, and I'm going to sort of speak about a thing that I think there's been like a surprising lack of focus, which is particularly how the Green Revolution might have changed might have changed things for people at the very bottom, and particularly the bottom of the land distribution, but the bottom of sort of other distributions of welfare. And I think it's odd that there hasn't been as much of a focus on these distributional aspects of late, because the Green Revolution was absolutely conceptualized as sort of tackling poverty and low agricultural productivity and hunger in India as well as in other places. So this one economist in 1987 wrote that the Green Revolution was meant to provide a lasting solution to the perpetual problems of rural poverty and hunger. And in fact, economists from the Green Revolution era in India were highly concerned with the distributional consequences. So there was a lot of economists, I'm listing some of them on the bottom here, but there's many more, who were worried that the smallest farmers were failing to adopt high-yielding varieties, or taking out more credit in order to do so, or profiting less from them once they adopted. There was controversy over whether high-yielding varieties were increasing agricultural wages, as you might think, given that they need a lot of labor, or whether, in fact, the agricultural wages were stagnating, whether landlords were trying to convert tenants or sharecroppers into laborers, which could be bad for a variety of reasons, and particularly might have eroded the land reform efforts that were ongoing in a similar time period. And then sort of a generalized concern that the high-yielding varieties may be increasing the skewness of land or of farming assets or of other indicators of human welfare. So the same economist of 1987 has, I think, a kind of depressing take on it. He says, all available statistics indicate greater and greater is immiseration and pauperization as the Green Revolution technology is rolled out in India. I enjoy this quote because nobody writes like this anymore. But also, I think it's sort of like the worst possible, thing that could happen. And you'd obviously like to think that's not true. And so these papers are all written with these very small data sets from like one area in Punjab in like 1971 or something. And so what we're trying to do is sort of go back and look at some of these questions, but with a national data set that's spanning a number of years. In fact, three national data sets spanning a number of years. So we're first going to ask whether the Green Revolution influenced the distribution of agricultural land in rural India, and whether it seems to have increased rural economic inequality by other metrics. And it looks like yes. In fact, the Green Revolution seems to have increased the number of marginal farms. By marginal farms, I'm using the government of India's definition, which is under one hectare. Very, very small, like difficult to eke out a living, so small. And increase the land share held by the largest and smaller farms, and reduce the land share held by medium-sized farms. And it also looks like it increased inequality in the distribution of productive farming assets, per capita income, and female schooling. But largely, to sort of come back to this thing on what does this mean, by improvements at the top of the distribution, which seems good, but with no change in the bottom of the distribution, sort of leaving the bottom of the distribution just sitting where it was to begin with. So this is sort of a story of people left behind. And then the second part, which I've done a bit of work on over time, but I'm not going to present a lot here. I'm going to give you like a couple of results from that, is through what mechanisms did these changes occur. And this is where I feel like there's a little bit of a mismatch. I'll say more about in this future, but there's a data problem here that I'm worried about proceeding too far until I figured out that data problem. So high-yielding varieties in India were introduced for the 1966-67 planting season, and they were primarily rice and wheat varieties, as well as some coarse cereal varieties. Like four being other ones, so primarily rice and wheat. And they were adopted most quickly with a sort of the steepest trend in the districts that had really thick aquifers that were good for irrigation, and less steeply in the districts that had less potential for irrigation, though they're still obviously adopted. A data problem of note, not even the problem that I'm going to point out there, a different one. I used district level VDSA data, the Village Dynamic Studies in South Asia, apportioned back to the 1969 districts for part of this analysis. And this is what it looks like if I go through 1989. That's what the HYV adoption rates. And if I go all the way through 2000, this is what it looks like. It gets really wonky at the end here because there starts to be all of these missing values for districts. So the VDSA data are not great from 1990 through 2000. So in terms of the literature that we're addressing, I think I find it surprising how disparate you have to go to like link all of these papers, but there's definitely a lot of papers on the relationships between agricultural productivity and rural inequality. For instance, we have a lot of evidence that new agricultural technologies differentially benefit richer farmers or larger farmers, that new agricultural technologies can influence wages, but they influence wages in different ways depending on whether the agricultural technology uses labor or substitutes for labor, sort of obviously. And that has implications for landless laborers, right? Importantly in this context. That increased agricultural productivity may influence family structure and farm division. And that increased agricultural productivity can influence demand for labor as well as non-agricultural sector spillovers in some conditions, and does different things in the non-ag sector in different conditions, which I'm going to come back to. So we're directly estimating the influence of this new agricultural technology, the rollout of high-yielding varieties, rice and wheat, in India, on the world distribution of productive capital and rural income. And it seems, looking at the mechanism, that I'll sort of suggestively say, and that's definitely not presenting to you everything that I've done here, but it looks like, in part, you have this lack of change for the people at the bottom of the distribution, because the landless, the smallest farmers and the landless are acquiring land. They're staying on very small plots of land, which do not have really, really high productivity. And yet there's a lack of non-ag sector spillover that's a sort of place for them to go. So there's not like a second market for them to escape to in these areas where the high yielding varieties are rolling out if they're stuck on these really small plots of land. So we're using this district level VDSA data. I'm not going to go into this in detail because I know I'm short on time after that problem. But this is tracking high-yielding varieties as well as other agricultural characteristics across districts, but apportioning all back to the 1966 districts, so keeping a panel of these 1966 districts over time. And then I'm using the household level ARIS REDS data set. This is the data set that Professor Rosenzweig wrote 17,000 papers on, all of which I have on my Dropbox. And that has 3 waves of data from 71, 82, and 99. And so basically they were tracking families over time, though of course there was a very high rate of attrition. And you might be worried that some households might differentially move out of the panel in the same way that Claudia was just talking about. And in fact, I do a similar thing to you looking at sort of who it is that leads that panel. And then I'm also going to use a National Family Health Survey, India's version of the DHS, and I'm going to pool two sets of that to reach all the way back to women who were born as early as 1950 to look at impacts on female education. So the way that I'm primarily going to identify what I'm going to claim as sort of at least plausibly, I don't want to say this is totally airproof, honestly, but plausibly causally identified impacts of high-yielding varieties is that I'm going to fix districts. I'm going to put a district fix effect and a state time fix effect. So essentially, I'm looking at districts that were just ahead of the curve for a state time or just below a state time, even once you fix out their own district level mean. A mean that, of course, is over a very long time. So it's not entirely sure what a fixed effect for a district looks like over such a long period of time. But I'm putting that in there. And so what I'm first going to do is I'm going to look at how the district level high-yielding variety from the BDSA, right? So the percentage of agricultural land that is covered in high-yielding varieties in, say, 1966 or 1972 is influencing the amount of farmers who are marginal or the land share of farmers who are marginal in the year afterwards. So with the 1 year lag with these districts and state time fixed effects. I do have supporting evidence that I'm happy to chat about that this identification strategy, seems plausibly okay. I doubt it's perfect. I'm following this paper that was published in JHE by Bharadwaj, Hala Fenske, and I think one other author. And when we do these sort of balance tests, we find that it looks like, conditional on these district and state time fixed effects, the high-yielding variety rollout is not related to observables that we can see about the districts, though it is related to temperature and rainfall shocks, which is not totally shocking, right? Because these rainfall shocks influence people's decisions about adoption. And so we control for those rainfall and temperature shocks. Additionally, as a robustness check, I'm going to use a sort of event study or a diff and diff style check to look at how aquifer thickness, the importance of aquifer thickness changed over time for these same outcomes, the number of farmers under a certain land size or the share of land going to those farmers. And this is following a paper that just came out in AEJ Applied. as well as some other papers before it that do similar effects. I don't have data for pre-trends on this stuff, and so I wouldn't really call this like a separate identification strategy because I cannot do the pre-trend checks. It's just sort of a robustness check, methodological robustness check. And then I'm going to do something similar to look at the distribution of farming assets per capita outcome and female education. So jumping into the distributional results, what you see is that as high-yielding varieties roll out, this is the BDSA data, and right below this is the ARIS-REDS data. As high-yielding varieties roll out, you see a buildup of these very small farms that are under 1 hectare, which is, again, I would say sort of normatively like not, doesn't look like it's ideal at first because this is not an amount of land that you can really eke out a good living on. But I'll show you great evidence at the end that actually it looks like some of these people are coming from landless, like it's the landless who are procuring land. So not necessarily a bad thing, right? But this, you're going to have this increase in the number of margin farms and less small and medium-sized farms. You see something similar in the ARIS-REDS. So the ARIS-REDS are not ideal for looking at this because actually the way that they sampled depended on the distribution of land within the village itself. I had this long back and forth with Andrew Foster to even understand how they were sampling. And so I think it's interesting that you see a similar buildup of marginal farms. This is sort of actually like, despite their sampling efforts, you still see a buildup of marginal farms. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to do it given the sampling. And then if you look at the acreage to marginal farms, you see that there's a buildup in the acreage to marginal farms, reduction in the acreage to small and medium farms, and a buildup in the acreage to large farms. And I just showed you there's not more large farms, so it's more that the large farms are getting larger, right? So there's more small farms, large farms are getting larger, and there's less acreage too and less numbers of these medium-sized farms as high-yielding varieties are rolling out. Results are similar if we examine the rollout of rice or wheat HIV separately. If we look at districts that are high aquifer sort of availability, low water availability, high water availability, if I look at different scans of data, and they're also not driven by that measurement error. So if I systematically start throwing out the districts that have that really crummy looking data that I showed you at the beginning, the results actually get stronger. So it looks more like that measurement error is sort of classical. It's biasing the effects maybe towards 0 instead of driving the effects, which I was very worried about in the beginning. When I do this difference in difference check, it looks like the effect of being on a thick aquifer becomes stronger for the number of farms who are marginal over time, and then actually becomes weaker. So a sort of non-linear effect becomes stronger slightly with large farms, but very little. And for small and medium farms, it becomes more negative, or at least for small farms, it becomes more negative. So this is, I would say, in line with like what you're getting here, right, is you're not getting the effect of aquifer thickness, you're getting the change in the effect of aquifer thickness over time. So if you think that that effect would get, more and more negative for some people and more positive for other people, in line with the effects that signs that I just showed you, like this would be in line with the same results. So I think it's sort of, it doesn't prove, but certainly doesn't contradict. It's sort of in line with what I just showed you. Do the same thing for acreage under farms. So I think the interesting thing, right, is that just because land ownership, you have less people sort of owning this middle-sized land and more in particular a buildup of these very marginal farms, it does not mean that, there would be the same impacts on various outcomes of welfare, right? And one of the reasons why is that there might be livelihood diversification, right? It might be that the people who have very small farms also go into the non-ag sector and they can do other things at the same time. And so they make a lot of money doing trading as well as, or some other sort of owning a shop as well as having a very small bit of land. And the other is that, maybe these medium-sized farmers, particularly near the towns, are going off and they're also finding sort of something else to do that's very productive. And so it could be that even if there's these effects on the landholding distribution, you don't find anything similar to the effects on say total household income. First, if I look at the total value of farming assets, is taking, not that it really matters since I'm putting in time fixed effects, but taking it all back to 1971 values, it looks like there's a reduction in the number of farmers who are in the middle quartiles of the farming assets. So this is irrigation as well as non-irrigation assets. And there's more farmers at the top and no change in the bottom, right? And this is generally what you're going to see, no change in the number of people who own very, very little productive assets for farming. If I look at per capita income, it looks sort of similar, that there's a reduction in the people in this third quartile and sort of, no statistically significant change at the top and the bottom, but maybe an insignificant build-up at the top and the bottom. And then the female education one is probably the strongest. You see that as high-yielding varieties roll out, basically, this is people who have zero, like this quartile is people who have no education. So there's no change in the number of people who have no education. This is the people who only achieve primary education. There's a reduction in the number of people who achieve primary education. This is similar, but not exactly to like going only through your O levels. Reduction in the people who achieve this sort of medium amount of education, and then a real increase in the number of people who achieve a lot more education.
Can I ask a clarification question? When you say primary education, does it include primary and up? Because decline in primary education could be that people started having more education.
Yeah, no, this is the number of people who did not get more than primary education. This is the sort of low education quartile. So you don't see any change, or sorry, that's what this is. This is no education whatsoever. This is I had some education, but I didn't get past primary. Does that answer your question? Or not?
Not entirely, but it's okay.
No, go ahead. Ask again.
No, I mean, as time goes, average education level has gone up, right? So you would expect that people, it makes sense people to graduate from primary rather than not having
for sure
primary education. So I could also, tell this in terms of saying that people actually move to your fourth quartile a lot more, right?
Just over time?
Yeah.
But this is not over time because this is fixing state time and looking at district to districts that have higher or lower.
Okay. So I mean the quartile is not very easy to describe.
Yeah, I take your point. Yeah, actually I could do it this way. So no education, a reduction in number of people who achieve primary education, number who only achieve primary but nothing else, reduction in the number of people who go to secondary but nothing higher, and increase in the number of people who have a higher education past like college, so to a certificate.
And these by construction have to basically sum up to zero, which I think is to your point, moving across these quartiles.
Right.
I totally realize I'm not getting your question, and I will come back. I really understand your point, and you understand it, and I don't, and I'm concerned about that. So let me come and just ask you about it later.
Sure.
Let's go to the problem.
Yeah. Let's go to the problem. So here's the problem. So that's all really interesting. But I realized this thing as I was working with this data set, which is that if I look at the states that. So like at some point I thought, I really need to go back and look at this heterogeneity. I was finding there's not super strong impact on yields. And I thought like, what is this heterogeneity? Like some districts, you see that HIVs are highly related to yields. Some they're not highly related to yields. What I realized is that I can sort of subset the districts that have really high rice yields. It's these districts over here, and at least like not negative wheat yields. And then everywhere else, that's not this turquoise color. So these guys here, they have not very strong yield impacts. And I thought like, there's something going on where high yielding varieties are really influencing yields in some districts, but not others. Like that seems kind of wild, because if that was really true, this was so spatial, like someone would have written about this already. So I must be missing something. And then I realized that actually, if I look at ARIS-RED's adoption rates, I can find that those same districts that look like they have high yields, I find that the district level VDSA variable on adoption is strongly indicative of ARIS-RED's individual level endogenous adoption in some states, but not in others. So now I'm a bit concerned that actually what's happening is that in these states, the high yielding variety variable that was, was part of the sort of state level thing, district level, organized by states that was reported to the government is really quite good. And it's good in that, like, I can see that it relates to the household level endogenous adoption rate reported in the ARIS data. And then in a bunch of the other data set that doesn't, in the other states, it doesn't seem to relate to the household level endogenous adoption prevalence. So for instance, if I look at just predicting
2 to 3 minutes, okay? I forgot.
Yeah, no worries. If I look at how it predicts endogenous adoption, you get like this sort of 1-to-1 ratio of how well it predicts endogenous adoption in a subset of states along the eastern border, and don't explain the eastern border, and also predicts yields in those areas, but not others. So that's really the main problem. Like what the rest of these bubbles here show is that actually, if I segment the distributional results I just showed you, they kind of hold it across both places. So it's not that I only find the distributional effects in these areas. I find the distributional effects in both areas. So it's not, I don't really know what to make of that the distributional results are there in both areas, but the underlying like predictive power for ARIS REDS endogenous adoption is only in a subset of states. The mechanism section is kind of what I told you, that what we see is that it looks like as high-yielding varieties are rolling out, smaller farms are becoming more likely to be marginal, landless farms are more likely to gain marginal land, but that people are also kind of getting stuck in agriculture. They're less likely to do non-agriculture. The non-agricultural wages are going down. And so it looks a little bit like you have this sort of resource curse story where there's a lot of farmers who are getting stuck farming on this very, very small level. There's not a non-agriculture sector for them to fall back on and engage in and get wages in. But of course, like, less than 1 hectare of land is never going to be something that you can really do very well on. So that's the kind of story that I think this paper will eventually tell. But I've like hesitated to continue with that analysis until I figured out this, because this thing is really bothering me right now. There you are.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot. Okay, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. Anyone? Yes, please.
I think the question was whether we got appropriate growth enhancement or not depends a lot on whether the economy is open or closed.
Yeah, for sure.
So I don't know, like maybe there is some way to categorize district service by taxes or something like openness.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out if this affects like whether the economies actually like just putting labor out.
Yeah.
In
those this paper by Foster Rosenzweig in 2004, it's kind of doing that, but it's basically making the case that in India, because goods are traded pretty well across space, like it's just that the market for non-ag goods is untied to the local production. And so the place that people are producing non-ag goods, you might as well just go to the places that wages are lower, which is not the places of high agriculture. And they're arguing that that's kind of India-wide. There's probably some heterogeneity, as you say, but I feel like my intention is a little bit not to actually redo any of that work, but to lean on the fact that they made that statement already and then show like that seems to be the case and what I can see also, and what does that mean for the poorest people who might like jobs not. So I agree with you that that's probably something that somebody really smart could even do a better paper that goes past EDCZ, but I feel like it's not the focus that I want to land on. It's there though.
Yes.
Yeah, the question about like market, how our farmers acquiring the land, like how the timing also can coincide with the land redistribution.
Yeah.
And so they just kind of apply something and give away, the government gave away like 1 acre of land to the landless, maybe.
Yeah. I think I don't know. I thought about this a lot. That how much could this be in picking up, like whether there's a relationship between the role of high yielding varieties and the land reform efforts. All the papers on the land reform, you'll notice that they're using state level implementation because it was implemented by the state. And what I'm doing is like districts within the states, but that doesn't mean that the implementation could not be correlated with the implementation of the land reform. And I think I sort of thought enough to think like I should do that. I should go into that a bit more, but where I would find information on the implementation quality of land reform at the district level. So yeah, I think we're
Mexican law, I think that's
It's done well, yeah.
Mexican law, like the old.
okay. I might ask you about that later. I would love to test that idea in your support because I think it's really important. And I think even if it's not proxying, I think that this type of effect could have attenuated the effectiveness of land reforms. I think no matter what, there's some type of things, right?
If there is more time, we can pick it up.
So eventually, yes, we can. You should chat afterwards, but just to respect the time and the events that are subsequent to this session, I would like to thank all of you for coming and for all of this super exciting presentation. It was absolutely